Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 250 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar and with me is Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Happy 250th episode.
I have to say, I swapped the episode. So normally we should have, the last episode that went out 2 weeks ago should have been our What's Going On. But I thought, no way am I giving 250 to someone else. We need to have it together. So so today is our What's Going On episode, where regular listeners will know that we share articles that we've come across, other news, mainly about the world of work, but mainly remote work. And we do try to pick evergreen content. So if you're listening to us in the future, then at least maybe you'll still get some value from it. Although sometimes it's very specific to now. And now is the 1st of October, 2020, which sounds nice, don't you think, Maya?
Oh, the end is in sight of this year anyway, or the last 12-week year. So the last chance to wring something out of 2020 and make the best of it.
Maybe that's why. So before we start, just a couple of reminders, listeners, and especially new listeners. Now, when you sign up to our newsletter, which comes out every month and has a list of mainly recommendations, reading and listening, and a digest of our own content also. But now when you sign up, you can download our guide to visible teamwork, our leading through visible teamwork, which is all about implementing asynchronous practices in your team. So, and thanks to Teresa Sigilito Holema, who shared that with her newsletter. So it's always really nice. So yes, listeners, it's a 15-page PDF, but it's got lots of illustrations. So it's okay, text heavy, isn't it? It's not too bad, no, Maya?
No, I think it covers all the relevant information and everybody absorbs that information differently. I think the illustrations add a great deal.
Yeah, great. So that's one. And the other is to remind you that we have a podcast that it's paused because I'm trying to get another episode recorded, but there never seems to be the time, which is Management Cafe, if you haven't listened to that yet, which is about management concepts in both co-located and remote teams. So back to basics, shorter episodes, solo episodes, but it's still out there, Management Cafe in all your favorite apps. And of course, over at virtualnotdistant.com in the podcasts tab. So let's start with our articles today.
What's going on?
What's going on? What's going on? So how about we start with a topical topic, some topical articles, which I think the thing at the moment, and it'll still be in 2 weeks' time when the episode is released, is this hybrid workplaces, the emergence of hybrid workplaces. And they're not just hybrid, aren't they? Because they are physical spaces. Some people are going to still be working remotely. So there's that thing at the back of our mind. But also there's spaces with social distancing, people wearing masks. It must be strange.
It must be really weird at the moment. And I think especially combined with all the official advice, go back to the office, don't go back to the office, stay at home, don't go on the trains, go on the train. So yes, I think for anybody going back to the workplace, it must be pretty weird right now. But even if this is a topical take, then I'm sure this is going to be a long-term source of tension and complication in the workplace.
Yeah, it's something I hadn't thought of also some months ago, that when eventually we could use the office, that was also going to be a very different experience. For some people, also an uncomfortable experience. I don't know if I told you. Did I tell you the story of my mother's friend's cousin who was allergic to metal? Maya? No? So so I'm also thinking as well as, some companies are asking people to go back to the office. Some companies, some organizations are giving the option. And I think it's always interesting to remember that there are always people who might not thrive in office spaces. Some will, others don't. And a very specific story, my mother has a friend, and her cousin is really happy that she can work remotely in Madrid because, one, commuting time. She doesn't like commuting, and her place of work is in the other side of Madrid. But she lives in quite a nice area, so she can go for walks. But mainly, she's allergic to some kind of metal. So going into the office actually and walking around and interacting, she can't really relax because she always has to be mindful of not coming into contact with this. So that just reminded me that beyond COVID, there's also reasons why people are not comfortable in the workplace and might have found a better way of working. So that just adds to the complexity of these decisions of whether we go back, who comes back, etc.
Yes, and you found an interesting couple of articles for us to look at about this one today.
Yeah, there's the first one is it's in people management, and it's commentary. It's actually about going back not going back, having both spaces, having both the office and online, the hybrid spaces. So it's actually from the 11th of August 2020, and it's called Beware the Office Politics of Hybrid Workplaces. What did you take from that, Maya?
Well, first of all, my immediate reaction was the relief that I don't work in an office or in a big organization anymore. That dread phrase, office politics. It really does seem that people will make office politics out of anything. And what we have now is a new dimension along which to divide and discriminate and carve up attitudes about different people. And what we're going to have now is the people who come back to the office versus the people who don't. It's always existed in hybrid teams, but the reasons for it might be more complex. There's likely to be more of a separation now, I would have thought, between those people who are able to come back, those people who might not, who might still be shielding for whatever reason, or people like your mum's friend who have particular unrelated health reasons, people who've moved a little bit further away. Or people who have educative or caring responsibilities. But I thought it was an interesting article, and it was basically just pointing out yet another area of difference that's going to have to be managed in the modern workspace.
Yeah, and I'll just quote a little paragraph. So it's a piece of commentary, so it's not evidence-based or anything, but it's starting to probably reflecting what a lot of people are thinking. If companies reopen their offices and give people the choice to come back, and the circumstances allow for, say, 50% of people to return to work, it's inevitable those individuals able to manage impressions, play politics, be part of the in-group and network will take advantage of this situation. Not least because the big bosses are leading by example, and they happen to prefer not being at home. After all, with business travel down, all they have is the office. That's also I hadn't thought of that, actually, that the fact that for those people who do like being out and about to do their work, now that there's less travel, then the office is definitely the place to be. So I hadn't thought of that some people really like traveling, and this is already clipping their wings.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I thought another thing that struck me from this article was this idea of letting people make the choice, or at least it being perceived as a choice, where actually there's going to have to be a certain amount of this, which is very top down, if offices are really only safe to accommodate, say, 50% of the normal cohort. And if you do end up with, a strange team dynamic going on whereby people feel they've really got to show their face or else, then are people going to be competing to be allowed back to the office? Is there going to be, this kind of, oh no, you can't come in where we've already reached our safe accommodation level, and how will that get carved up? Yeah. It is weird, and I'm sure it's absolutely true that this is what it's like when you let people make choices and decisions, they get judged for them. I like the way the article compared it to a dress down Friday, And this idea that suddenly that becomes something that you have to pay attention to. And to quote, when you let people make choices, you automatically increase the willingness to scrutinize their preferences. You impose dress down Friday and the stakes are suddenly much higher than when people were forced to wear standard workwear.
Yeah.
So everybody's going to be looking who's coming in, who's not, who never shows their face, whereas who is so happy to get back to the office, what's going on at home.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and also the choice. And I mean, my husband loves being back in the workplace, and he really doesn't want to be at home anymore. But of course, like you said, it's not that simple. Not everyone can return whenever they want. Also, so I would say that one of the reasons that I wanted to share this article is for people who are making those decisions, just to really, of course, no one is doing this lightly, and there's all the safety stuff also to look after, but to really think of all the levels that might happen, and psychologically all the stuff that might be taking place. So, and this article just starts, like we said, to just demonstrate all these different things. And what I thought very interesting, so there's always been this thing, especially in companies and organizations, where some people are away from headquarters more than others, or completely away, as in remote employees. There's another article that we've got here today from the 8th, which was updated 8th of September 2020. And this is actually from the New York Times. And this, for me, reflects another kind of possible divide that did we think this was going to happen? And maybe we've always been there a bit, which is called Parents Got More Time Off. Then the Backlash Started. And I'll read the subtitle. Pandemic policies at tech companies have created a rift between parents offered more benefits and resentful workers who don't have children. And this article is all about that. It's about the perception that people with children are being given more leeway, more support, and that maybe they're doing less work. I mean, considering we're in the pandemic also, and all the homeschooling that's been going on. And I just thought, how interesting, because I always thought, so when we're advocating for flexible work and remote work, remember that, Maya? There was sometimes the parent population was always quoted as people who benefited most from it, and we always said, look, it shouldn't just be there for parents; it should be there for everyone. So this is a conversation that's been around flexible work for a very long time, and I just found it fascinating that it's really come to the surface now.
Yeah, it is an interesting confluence of different factors and events. I suppose the first thing is the visibility.
Yeah.
Because before, yes, you knew probably that some of your colleagues had parenting commitments or other kinds of caring commitments or different things going on in their lives. But this is so much more literally visible now when you're seeing into people's homes on Zoom calls. That's just how it is. So there's more inclination to talk about that context, to bring it into the room with you. And whilst on the whole, I think that's a really good thing and has done a great deal to make communications in the workplace better, I suppose this kind of backlash was always inevitable, that people are going to see differences in treatment, differences in work allocation. Now they've got something more to relate that to, and it might not be the whole picture. And, it's easy for people whose work adjusts easily to remote work, and maybe they were remote working already, but maybe their lives didn't change that much during the pandemic when schools were closed. But actually for parents, it was a complete turning upside down of life. I know people who've got 4 kids and that they were trying to home educate on different curriculums and things like that, and were still expected to try and do some sort of work. So yes, they really did need different kinds of consideration from their employers. And again, that, I've worked from home, being sort of the only home-based member of a team, or being in a wholly remote team when people have got different levels of parenting responsibilities. And while there's always give and take, there's in normal circumstances, there's an idea that it's pretty much your responsibility to manage that outside of work commitments. Whereas this year, all that just turned upside down. And it's probably yet another manifestation of how differently the effect of the pandemic played out depending on personal circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And I also thought this was interesting because it goes very well with the other article on the hybrid versus remote, and who's going back to the office, who's not, who's got children, who doesn't, the perception of colleagues. It just adds to that complexity, and that need to really stop and make sure that we're not that we're not favoring some kind of situation over
Definitely.
another, or if we're
It'd be
favoring
very
it,
easy. Well, sorry, I'm
Carry on.
talking over you, but
That's fine.
it's so easy for managers to do this unwittingly, to not
exactly.
realize, how it's looking to different people. And these differences have always been there. I mean, I remember the issue of parents versus non-parents years ago when my husband worked in information security, and it was just somebody brought up the question of how come the people without kids never get considered to have Christmas off. It's just taken as a given that will be prioritized to parents, but actually, that could be seen as incredibly unfair, depending on whose perspective you looked at it from. So these differences have always been there. This year has just rubbed our faces in it in more ways than one, with good and bad consequences.
Yeah. So I think that article is fascinating. It's a fascinating read. It's full of really specific examples from the big tech companies, but actually just as a reflection point, not just with parents, non-parents, but people with different situations. I think it's worth a read. It's a long read also.
Yeah, it is paywall behind the New York Times. But
is
you
it?
Can have. I think if
I've got it
because. Yeah, but I wasn't logged in on my iPad. I think you get so many articles a month, or something. It's one of those.
Okay, all right. Well, just wait till next month.
It's worth logging in for.
Yes. Put it in pocket. Good. So I thought we could move to how then remote work is evolving. So this is one of the things we are seeing. There's also. I think that the profile of remote work is also evolving because it's bringing up all these things. And also, of course, as we know, it's being taken more seriously in some quarters, still not in others. And so Eva Rimbau shared this article, I think it was in LinkedIn, which is actually, it's a study. It's an OECD policy response to coronavirus. And the title of the study, I haven't read the whole thing, to be honest. I've just got the key messages. Is productivity gains from teleworking in the post-COVID-19 era? How can public policies make it happen? And I particularly found this really interesting because following what's going on in Spain, where, of course, they've just approved the law of the teleworking law. And so I'm finding it really fascinating how the public, how government and legislation in some places is now getting involved, whereas before it was, it's just kind of happening. So some of the key messages, this one's quite interesting. While more widespread telework in the longer run has the potential to improve productivity and a range of other economic and social indicators, such as worker well-being, gender equality, regional inequalities, housing, emissions, its overall impact is ambiguous and carries risk, especially for innovation and worker satisfaction. And this one I really like. And of course, I'm going to say caveat, if this is I think it was a lot of this has been looking at remote work during COVID. So of course it's not what we know and love about remote work. I'll just give one more point and pass to you, Maya. And then the other one, to minimize the risks of more widespread teleworking harming long-term innovation and decreasing worker well-being, policymakers should assure that teleworking remains a choice and is not overdone, in inverted commas. Cooperation among social partners may be key to address concerns. And then one of the concerns is hidden overtime. So I like the example. I'm not sure about how you can overdo remote work, but I think it's really important to remember that if it's done and we don't monitor how it's going, that it can have repercussions.
Yes, and it is good that both that new legislative frameworks are emerging in Spain and elsewhere, and that research is being done at the level of bodies like the OECD. I thought the first thing that struck me was the title, which seems to imply we're in a post-COVID-19 era. So I hadn't heard that. So that's good news for everybody. What it does seem to be doing is taking the perspective that, okay, something happened and it caused a change, and now teleworking, as they're persisting in calling it, is here to stay. I still find that particular label seems about 20 years out of date and really doesn't seem to embrace everything that remote working and location independent working quite has to offer. And I also highlighted that paragraph about assuring teleworking remains a choice and not overdone, in quotes. So I'd love to dig into what they really mean by that, or by whose perception it's being overdone. And obviously there is a huge difference between when things are forced by legal constraints on movement and association versus when people actually have a real choice about where to work. But it does feel to me like it's almost trying to prove a negative, and a sort of slight sense of surprise that there actually are measurable productivity gains from this strange teleworking, despite everything it does to hide overworking and reduce innovation and so on. So it is a bit of a shame. But yeah, very interesting what's happening in Spain, and that there is now actually some legal protection for home working to make sure that people's expenses are met and that they can disconnect from work and so on. So that's all good. And hopefully things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and something I think I heard Eva say it the other day is that, of course, during the pandemic, the working from home has been very difficult for some people. But once legislation is in and employees need to look at it properly, for example, you'll stop having these situations where there's one computer for a whole family and the remote worker will have their own computer during where they can work. So I think that I think that the legislation can help with some of the problems that are there at the moment. But of course, it's huge. And I attended the other day a talk by someone talking through the legislation. My God, are they overcomplicating things? But it's really, a lot of the time, I think it's a worst case scenario that they're looking at it from. So for example, that there's no hidden over hours, overtime. That kind of thing, which comes from, okay, all the things that could go wrong and how do we legislate so that they don't happen or that we control them, is really
That's
interesting.
Good in a way. I mean, certainly things like employment law should be made like that. We've had so much emergency legislation this year from every government, whether things just get implemented, because emergency powers have had to be seized upon, and then it does end up full of loopholes, and even government ministers can't remember what it's supposed to be because it's not consistent. Whereas at least they have gone through and dotted every I and considered every angle of it. And even the things like costs, you maybe wouldn't expect to see that enshrined in law, but actually broadband can be really expensive here. I know lots of people from the UK are really surprised when they hear what we have to pay for our fibre symmetric connection. It's excruciatingly high. There was a headline in the BBC News saying that Spain was going to bankroll working from home. So I seized on that and thought, that looks interesting. Tell me more about that. And basically it meant we're going to meet your out-of-pocket expenses because you have to by law. So that's all it meant.
Yeah. So for new listeners who might not know, Maya is based in Spain and I'm based in London, just to clarify.
We're really location independent.
Yes, completely. We switch locations. So, and also just one other point that I just think it's so interesting to see. What I'm seeing also in Spain, what's happening is that the introduction of telework, as they still call it, is actually more a functional thing, and they're going straight into how do we do it rather than how do we change our mindset to be able to do it. So I'm seeing programs that are starting as training programs rather than culture change programs, and that's interesting and it's a bit risky, as we know, because but maybe we start with training and then we make the best out of our new situation.
And culture will catch up. In a way, yes, it's kind of dragging the culture along in the wake of the practical changes. But again, I suppose that's just a function of this strange year and what is needed to happen. And maybe there is more of a top-down effect as well when employers have to pay for equipment and broadband and things like that will change the acceptability of it all. And it does require that kind of government level intervention. There were, even in things like, there are still large parts of the country that don't have reliable broadband, there are whole areas that are underserved. The same thing happens in the UK, of course, and in cities in the US. So there's an awful lot of that stuff has to come from the very top down, or even making sure that there's access to equipment. There were laptops and webcams and things were out of stock in places like MediaMarkt around April because everybody bought them.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So talking of the profile, carrying on with the profile of remote work, Maya, you shared this article from Fast Company from, blah, 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 I don't have the date, but supposed sometime in September. And it's called Extremely Transparent and Incredibly Remote, GitLab's Radical Vision for the Future of Work. And it reminded me on when so GitLab has been sharing what they're doing for years,
Yes.
and they haven't started now. And it reminds me of last year when the BBC had an article about Automatic, that 1,000 company that didn't have offices, which of course they'd been around for ages. So I just thought this fascinating. You shared this article.
Yeah, I shared it because I thought it was a nice piece anyway. It was a little bit like the BBC suddenly discovering Automatic were a big remote company, because everybody in this space knows that GitLab and their documentation are kind of the go-to for this kind of thing, and the way that they do transparency, the way that they walk their talk. And they've been doing it for years, and they make it all available freely. So it's all just out there. I really liked the way that this whole article was focused on the not work connections, and the way that they really have dug into how and therefore by extension why it's so important to talk about things like kayaks or whatever else, their weekend plans and the games and everything else, why they have specific calls and channels dedicated to that. So I really liked that reflection of the planned spontaneity that we talk about in our own visible teamwork framework. It's like, yes, it's great. GitLab, get this. So
yes,
it's getting through.
Yes, well, all the visible teamwork really is a collection of what we've been seeing and absorbing that people are doing and just giving them a name. So of course they've been sharing how they're doing this. There's especially their planned spontaneity with their open coffee link that they keep for anyone to pop in or out. So it's really great. I really like the profile they're getting, and also this was also quite recent. They now, so Darren Murph, and it says one more instructor, I don't know who that is, and Jessica Reeder. They now have a course on Coursera, and it's called How to Manage a Remote Team. And for those of you who might not have gone into free MOOCs, massive online courses, Coursera is a brilliant platform. They've got people from top universities across the world. I've taken courses, I've watched courses and read courses by Dan Ariely, really high-profile people. And I think to have GitLab there running a course, How to Manage a Remote Team, is like a real validation of what's going on in the space. I'm quite excited.
Yes, that's going to be a real masterclass. I'll dig out a link for that for the show notes, because I think it is probably, if you want quality information, you need to go to people who are doing it well. And I don't think you could do better than GitLab.
Yes.
The fact that they have written it down, they've got a protocol for it, whatever it is. It says their employee handbook, if printed, would span more than 7,100 pages. So they've worked out how to do it. And even to actually take the time to document a big section on informal communication in an all remote environment. This is, we've got some great blog posts and podcasts on planned spontaneity, but it just reflects the fact that nothing happens in the remote space unless it's intentional. And they totally get that. And so they've spelled it out, and it's just there. You can pick it up and read it and implement it. It says more than 36 ways co-workers can virtually connect beyond the basic Zoom call. So there you have it.
Check it out, listeners. So that's where we are now. That's the profile now. Now let's move into the future. So Maya, you shared this article, I think from The Guardian, called Log On, Chill Out. Holiday resorts lure remote workers to fill the gap left by tourists. And this is an article from the 5th of September 2020. What is it about, Maya?
Well, it's just saying everybody should come to Spain. After all, you thought that maybe you shouldn't, but actually, yes, you definitely should. Obviously, hospitality and travel and tourism has been massively impacted this year across Europe. And I have no sort of personal axe to grind there. I'm lucky enough to be one of the few people where I live who doesn't work in those industries. But it does mean that there are new creative ideas coming forward about ways to attract different kinds of guests and different kinds of people into different locations. And I think it's a great idea if holiday resorts can attract remote workers. We've seen some high-profile cases, places like the Barbados remote worker visa, which seems to be an interesting way of getting people to pay for something that people have been doing for years anyway. But I think it's great that Spain's getting behind this, from the Canary Islands to where I live in Valencia. You are welcome. Come, bring your laptop. We have sunshine, we have broadband, we have resorts that are peaceful and quiet, so you could do a lot worse.
Yeah, I think if listeners, if you're interested in this and you're a relatively new listener, check out episode 212, which is called Remote Work for Social Change, and we've got Nacho Rodriguez in talking about precisely Gran Canaria and how they have been, the government there, and of course people like him have been trying very hard, and for many years have been working on saying Gran Canaria, it's not just for the tourist that comes and goes. It's also here for the digital nomad who bring a more sustainable kind of tourism, who have a different kind of tourism, and also for the person that just wants to live in this kind of environment, but work for whoever they want to work with. So I think that is really what's really nice. Again, once more, that's been going on for a while, and now it's hit the mainstream. So it's in The Guardian, which is, and Nacho is quoted in The Guardian, which I think is great. Hello, Nacho.
That's great. Yes. It's like, hi, Nacho. It says he's the founder of Nomad City, which is now rebranded as Repeople, really kind of going beyond that stereotype of the young surfer dude, digital nomad, to attract more diverse, mature audiences, people who just want to live and work somewhere different. And the islands have got the year-round climate as well. So, it's quite tempting to think maybe I should head down there for the winter.
Yes. And Repeople because of the repopulation aspect. So that's what they're thinking, to giving that extra, more people around in the Canary Islands.
Yeah, it's great. They never had heavy industry in those islands, so they need this kind of modern workers to come and bring the work with them, and it's so good for the local economy, and you get the quality of life of the beaches and the mountains and everything else. It's a win-win.
Yeah, and to contrast, we can close this section on the office, and I just wanted to share this, but maybe we don't go into it in too much depth, because I find it it's from wire.co.uk, 17th of September, and it's called "Bosses Are Doing Weird Things to Get People Back in the Office." And the subtitle and the sublines are: would you go back to the office if you were paid £55 a day for transport? What if you had free food? Your boss thinks you will. And I just thought it was really interesting. This is something I never thought we'd see. I mean, we've had people trying to keep people within the offices, by offering great breakfast and stuff like that, and just giving people a home to stay and hang around with as much as possible. But to spell it out like this, I just thought that is really interesting.
Yeah, it's just one of those that makes you think, so what's the motivation then behind this? Because yes, we know that the big tech companies have always done this kind of thing of free food and all sorts of services and things with the idea to try and keep people to basically live at Google or Apple or wherever they work. But in sort of typical London offices, this is really new and different. And the idea of, I don't know, why don't they let them just carry on as they are? I can understand it might be a lot easier and safer for people to come into the office if you stick them in a private cab rather than having them get the tube in. But
that to be honest, that is a big incentive. That is a big incentive. Yeah, because that's one of the problems, isn't it? What is stopping people? What are in a way they're looking at what is stopping people from going into the office, and they're making sure that it's not because some people are not staying home because they work better at home, but because they are afraid of going into the office, and they're very different things. I found that interesting.
Yes, it is. And, it's one of those things that's a new trend that's really only just emerging now. I think it's something that we'll be keeping an eye on and see, does it work? Are people incentivized to come back to the office if they're going to ride in a black cab and have a free breakfast? And if they're going to get free access to COVID testing, which a lot of the employees mentioned in this article are providing.
Yeah.
And obviously that's going to be something influenced by how widely available or not public sector testing is. So, people say I'll risk going into a meeting just so I can find out
Yes.
my COVID status, because I can't get anywhere with the local testing service. So, yeah, really interesting. This is such a new and fast moving thing that we will have to keep an eye on it.
Yeah. So everything, I hope listeners that, especially if you are making decisions or if you're contributing or if you're just interested in the whole topic, I think this collection of this first batch of articles really shows how complex these decisions are of whether we go back to the office, whether we stay home, and all the different factors and levels that are involved. So there's just to wrap up the articles section, there's a couple of things that come up which I thought they were interesting, and also they were shared by people in the network. So I thought, yeah, they're interesting. So one of them I found a little bit like comfort food, comfort reading, and it was shared by regular listener Chris Coladonato, and it's in ink. And it was, I don't have a date for it, but it is called 7 Ways to Rally Your Remote Team in Confusing Times, How to Bring Your People Together When Things Are Falling Apart. And it's they all start with R.
Yes, I hadn't realised that. Yes, they do.
So,
yeah, sort of cringing at the listicle approach, but there's actually some rather nice stuff in here. Yeah, this is, a lot of it's quite soft and woolly, but that's what people need in a crisis. I think a bit of comfort, a bit of intimacy and acceptance and communications, and there's some nice stuff in here about being responsive, saying things more than once, being resilient, which doesn't seem to quite fit with the rest of the list, being reflective. And so it's quite a nice thing to remember. It's also just interesting that somewhere like Inc., which is quite hard and businessy, is running these quite touchy-feely bits of content now.
Yeah. Well, it's needed. It's so, like, people are really screaming for it because it's so needed. It's such a heightened situation, isn't it? That it doesn't matter. Yeah. August 17th, 2020. And 2 for the price of 1. If you scroll down, we're not going to go into it, but there's an article that says how to stay creative when your team is working remotely. So scroll down and you can have a look.
There's probably just only 7 things you need to do.
That's nice. Yeah. So that's a nice comfort thing. And another article that I really welcomed also, because it's got research from June 2020, and this was shared by Valentina Torner on LinkedIn. It's by it's by Erin Kasari, and it is called, if I can open it, have you got it there? Because my trailer's playing up.
The traits of good remote leaders.
Yes, and sorry, carry on.
No, it's just saying that this was research that, as you mentioned, was done in June, and it was based on 770 people. It was analysed over 6 months, so that must have covered quite a shifting period of time to try and define these traits. Now, when I looked through this article in preparation for this recording, I couldn't find out how they got these traits. Was it what other people saw as being effective leadership traits, or was it what the leaders themselves defined as their strengths?
I don't know.
I was curious about that, because some of these it's not that I disagreed with them, but I was thinking, is that observed or intrinsic?
Listeners, if you have read the article and also the study, the study is up for grabs. You can download the PDF. I haven't had a good look at it yet. It's called Who Emerges, and also it's interesting that we're talking about not formal leaders always. So it says who emerges into virtual team leadership roles, the role of achievement and ascription antecedents for leadership emergence across the virtuality spectrum. So I think you need a degree to understand the title. And not me, I don't have that. But it's really interesting. I think I really like the article itself, not the study, because it really summarizes very well what is quite a heavy study, with a bit of vocabulary that I'm having trouble understanding. Yes, so that's an interesting question, Maya. That how are these traits what are being seen, or is this something that is a self-reflection thing?
I suppose to take the one example from the in-person leads were seen as a typical trait was extroversion. Now, I've known some very good leaders who were very introverted, but they performed
Mm.
the leadership function, and probably that aspect of it, that group communication and energizing and everything else, cost them quite a lot of energy and projection, but they did it as part of their leadership role. Whereas, so it was an action rather than an attribute.
Yeah, but even that is interesting, that is what they needed to get the job done. So I think from the point of view of the article, which is basically saying we can see different kinds, different traits, different behaviors in those leading in the co-located space versus those leading in the remote space. And these can be the differences. I think even that, regardless of whether it's something we are doing innately or that we are having to learn how to do, I think, I understand what you mean.
It's an interesting one because I think some of those sort of really extroverted, dynamic, charismatic communicators who are probably very good face-to-face would have more trouble the other way around trying to adopt the traits that were found to be the strengths of remote leads, which are things like being productive and organized and being able to communicate in writing. It's harder the other way around to fake it till you make it.
What I really liked, apart from the reflection of seeing, the spaces are different, therefore leadership is different. I like the fact that it's saying, okay, this might be affecting people's choices, going right back to our other set of articles. So I wanted to quote Erin as saying, this difference in traits might explain why a lot of organizations that are seeing benefits of remote work, even during a pandemic, ! Are still thinking to go back to the office. The problem might not be only organizational, it might be personal. And then she says, a large number of managers that had all the right traits to be successful in person, leads, are now feeling something is missing as remote leads. Lacking a model to explain this gap and how to fill it, the simplest answer is just to go back to the office where their leadership isn't threatened. Another dimension.
Really interesting. And actually, all of the things which are demonstrated as necessary for good remote leadership are learnable skills. These are things that people can improve on. So I think just the fact that this study has drawn attention to them in itself is a really good starting place.
And also from the point of view that sometimes we're interpreting the reason for organizational leaders to want people back in the office, it's being interpreted as control. Maybe it's not got anything to do with that. Maybe it's got to do with comfort zone of leadership style.
Yes.
So I think this also made me think, this is, well, as we know, it is so much more complex. And I think that's a really important thing also for those people making those decisions to understand where it's coming from so that they're not misinterpreted again. I find it fascinating. Anyway, we could talk all day. So, and then I've got...
We do.
We do talk all day. So for the last bit of this general news before we go into the much shorter section of Virtual Not Distant and community news, is that on Word Online, you can transcribe now. You can dictate onto Word in Office 365, and the transcription is pretty cool. And I was really excited about that. I just get excited about this stuff.
It's just amazing. It's getting better and better all the time, I think, in a quite scary way.
Yes.
Just the way that AI can really glean so much from our context and intention, as well as the actual sounds that come out. So it's Word's latest version seems to be among the best, but others aren't far behind. And I suppose they're all using the same kind of algorithms in this continual arms race for our attention, but it just makes it easier to do anything from anywhere, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. So let's go on to the Virtual Not Distant community updates, where we'll also be talking about a little bit of AI. Although having said that, Maya, I'm not sure that the LinkedIn name pronunciation thing can be considered AI. It's just a recording, isn't it? Like making it sound really complicated. But listeners, now this is brilliant. So this is when you see that some people really get it. You see that LinkedIn, what they've done, and I think Nenad said, someone on my LinkedIn or Twitter thread said that this was only available on the mobile. So I wonder what's happened, whether it is only available on the mobile app or also online, is that basically you can now record your name in your profile so that another person goes, they play and they hear your name, how you say it. I thought it was brilliant.
It's great, yes, and I love that you've recorded yours both in English and in Spanish, because I've never truly heard that difference before, though obviously it's obvious when you hear it. I didn't do mine because I suddenly thought I might do it wrong. I didn't know what my name was or how to say it anymore, so I'll let people continue to guess and get it wildly different as they have done throughout my life.
Well, I think also in when you have I speak mainly to English people, and if I say it in my Spanish accent, when I say Pilar or Ti, what usually happens is they try to imitate the accent, and you don't need it. You can just say Pilar or Ti with an English accent. So I thought that's why I had both. I can't access my Twitter at the moment, but we'll put the link to the post on Twitter where I very happily shared this, and everyone else was very excited too. So that just goes to show. And I also wanted to share another conversation that I had on LinkedIn. And remember, of course, that we have a LinkedIn page with lots of updates and stuff. Again, at the moment, updated by Becky. So join us on LinkedIn there. And I asked whether anyone had research on the effect of asynchronous communication in remote teams and its effects on intrinsic motivation. And out of that came a lot of interesting stuff, including research that I hadn't quite read that is being done by NASA. So there's some stuff around async there. There's we started a conversation around whether if you look at Tuckman stages of teamwork formation, whether are we, because we've gone remote, have we gone back to forming, to right to the beginning of a stage, or are we somewhere in the middle? What's happened to that as a theory? So that's an interesting thread. So I invite anyone to go and have a look at it. It's public.
Yeah.
And then talking of, I'll say this one and we'll go on to yours, which is much more exciting, Maya. I was also really excited that I was interviewed by email for the WashingtonPost.com for the travel section, where they talked about how having been caught overseas is affecting Americans' hours and the time zone differences, how they're coping with time zone differences. So this are people who haven't been able to return home and they've decided to stay somewhere else. And I was excited because they took the quotes about asynchronous communication and how important it is.
Yeah, I was very impressed you got that in there. Yes. But that's basically what makes this stuff work, doesn't it? You don't have to be synchronously online if you're stuck on the other side of the world.
Yes.
You can still get your work done, and you can overlap for certain specific meetings and conversations, and the rest of the time you can just get on with it.
Yeah, and async is really the thing now that people are wanting to hear more about and to understand more. But Maya, you have your book is coming out soon. Maybe
finally, yes.
Maybe even by the time that this episode comes out. But you've got a new title.
Yes, it might be around the time that this episode actually drops as well. But there's many a slip still to go on. Yes, the book is, well, it's the first of the series about healthy, happy home working, and really the intention is to flip around the work that we do at Virtual Not Distant, where we work with managers and teams to look at what they need to really try and identify with and communicate with the perspective of the home worker, and particularly the maybe rather sudden and reluctant home worker that has emerged this year. And book one is all about the transition and making that shift, whether you wanted to or not, how to make it work best for you and make sure you get what you need from your life and your work. And it's simply called Out of the Office.
Simply, not at all. It's great.
No, not simply, because it was backwards and forwards for ages trying to name it. But I think I ended up settling on that because I would love to have emphasized more about liberation and freedom and all the things that remote work has always represented to me. But obviously this year it's different and not everybody's had freedom. So what we have done is change the office for something else. So a little bit of a play on words there with the idea of an email autoresponder, but being out of the office at the moment, it means being at home. It won't always, but you can make it mean what it needs to for you.
Excellent. So Out of the Office, and Maya, you will stick the link you will stick the link for your newsletter or your mailing list in the show notes. So if people want to hear about when the book comes out, they will, and they can share it with their friends also.
Lovely. Thank you. Please share it with your friends, especially if you know anyone who's struggling with this stuff.
Yeah. And talking of sharing, thank you very much to everyone who shares our episodes, who shares our work. It really means a lot to us. You know that we've been creating content for a very long time, and what we didn't expect was for suddenly so many people to be able to benefit from it. We always look, it's always, you always think you're preaching to the converted, which was very much the most 100% of the audience probably for the show. And now we've got some new listeners. As always, we're being very mindful that we strike a balance of content between those who are new to the world of remote and those who already understand it and who are fighting more for the potential that remote work can have as a tool for social change, for more equality, for basically people being happier at work, not just the thing that has saved us from everything falling apart with the pandemic. I want to thank Rowena Henniger for a very beautiful, I'm even getting a bit emotional actually as I remember it, which was almost like a letter saying, you've used me and I saved you from the thing. I saved you from a very difficult situation, and now you're ready to throw me into the the trash.
Like a love letter to remote work being dumped.
Yes, and then saying, you've forgotten about sustainability in other ways, social change, not climate change, but the effect it can have on saving the planet. My words are failing me, but really. We don't want to forget about that. So anyway, that was a little bit of preachy. So having said that, if you are new to remote work and you want to download our guide, Leading Through Visible Teamwork, sign up to our newsletter. Remember, we've got another podcast management cafe. And remember that you also have listeners, lots of other podcasts you can listen to, because that's another space that's exploded. And you've chosen to stay with us for almost an hour. So thank you. You are hardcore listeners. We couldn't be more grateful. Maya, do we want to say goodbye?
Yes, absolutely. And just to echo what Pilar has said, we've got so much great content which has been there. And a lot of it is evergreen. Dig back through the blog, use the search, because you'll find whatever you need. We've probably covered it. And we're well aware that our audience doesn't just include people who might be new to remote working, but they might be very experienced managers and leaders who just suddenly having to grapple with a new context. It's such a new phenomenon, but we're here for you. So thank you for sticking with us.
Oh yeah, we're here for you. So if you need anything, virtualnotdistant.com. We do lots of stuff apart from the podcast. All right, listeners, thank you for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.